Welcome to the Chapter 17 overview, Atlantic Revolutions and Their Echoes, 1750 to 1914. Main idea: Enlightenment philosophy inspired revolutions in France and European colonies in the Americas, changing views on the role of government and the source of its authority. Relevance. What do you think? This common question would not have been asked before the revolutions described in this chapter. As you know, the great majority of the states we have studied so far were monarchies, ruled with absolute authority by kings and emperors. Augustus in Rome, Charlemagne in Western Europe, George III in Great Britain. In the 21st century, democracy is the expected political structure, and demonstrations for freedom and equality resound around the world. Enlightenment philosophy began a series of revolutions that created a shockwave that continues to influence our world today. Setting the stage. In Chapter 16, you read about the scientific revolution and how thinkers like Copernicus and Isaac Newton used reason and experimentation to challenge the theological view of the universe. During the Enlightenment, philosophers like Voltaire and Locke applied these principles to political affairs, concluding that man was by nature born free and should not live a life chained to the political authority of a hereditary monarch. Beginning in the 18th century, political leaders put these ideas into practice and changed the world forever. So the first red heading is called Comparing Atlantic Revolutions. Revolutions in North America, France, Haiti, and Spanish America were practical applications of Enlightenment philosophy, raising social, political, and cultural issues in the new nations and beyond. First in North America. The first of these revolutions was in the North American British colonies and was the most conservative of the Atlantic revolutions. By 1776, the colonists there had already developed a measure of self-government, and the revolution was motivated by a desire to maintain these democratic values in response to efforts of the British government to tighten control over the colonies. Economic difficulties inspired the British to enact new taxes, and revolutionary leaders like Jefferson, Adams, and Hamilton were inspired by Enlightenment philosophy and their own experience with self-government to declare independence from Britain. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," is a good reminder of the central causes of the revolution. As they built a new republican government, American revolutionaries built a society that inspired others to declare independence as well. And the first of those places is in France. The Americans relied on the support of Britain's chief European rival for military support. After American independence, French officers and soldiers returned home inspired by the practical application of the Enlightenment ideals of hometown heroes like Rousseau and Voltaire. Events in France were inspired by economic difficulties and taxation as well, but the revolt was much more class-based than in America, with the lowest class, known as the Third Estate, demanding proportional representation while aiming to create a society in which all citizens were subordinate to the will of the majority. The resulting revolution was more radical as well, culminating in the execution of King Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette, and a period of paranoid enforcement of radical revolutionary principles known as the Terror. In France, the revolution had moderate success, and after a general named Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in a military coup, the government reverted to a monarchy, though one in which personal freedom was sacrificed for economic opportunity and social equality. Napoleon conquered much of Europe and spread the ideals of the French Revolution, planting seeds that germinated during the first half of the 18th century until a series of rebellions in the middle of the century challenged monarchies throughout the continent. In this manner, the French Revolution was more directly influential than the American, which served for many colonial subjects as a distant, theoretical possibility. Next, we turn to Haiti. The Haitians were certainly inspired by the French, launching the only successful slave rebellion in history. Haiti was socially divided, with white colonists and slaves of African descent, both calling for freedom from France, but obviously with different goals in mind. This is a good opportunity to recognize a similarity across these revolutions. Subjects united by a common goal of independence often find that they have very different ideas of what that independence should look like. In the case of Haiti, the leadership of a former slave named Toussaint Louverture led to the establishment of a new country focused on self-government and social equality. These events inspired revolutionaries of all races in other American colonies, and inspired a formalized movement to abolish slavery, which are covered in the next two headings. Revolutions across the Spanish-American colonies began for similar reasons as those in North America and Haiti, but lasted much longer. This was mainly due to the fact that revolutionaries there tended to be elite Creoles, and their fear of social rebellion from below, as in Haiti, drove their plans to separate from Spanish colonial authorities. Two early rebellions, one organized by Miguel Hidalgo and José Morelos in Mexico, and one in the name of the last Inca emperor, Tupac Amaru, reminded Creole elites of the fragile nature of their status near the top of the social pyramid. Their answer was nativism, a conscious depiction of any colonial resident born in Europe as the enemy. The goal was to unite all natives, regardless of race or class, under the revolutionary banner, which proved to be difficult. Another challenge was the desire of leaders like Simón Bolívar to unite all of the Spanish colonies in a single country, which proved to be impossible. By 1826, most of the colonies had achieved independence, as you can see on the map shown here, but without the unity enjoyed by their North American revolutionary counterparts. So instead of one nation, especially everything in green here on this map, which is the former Spanish colonies, instead of this being one grand nation, it split, of course, into a number of nations, and that created some trouble down the road for them. Okay, so the next red heading is called Echoes of Revolution. The Atlantic revolutions had political influence into the 19th century and also inspired three main movements: abolitionism, nationalism, and feminism. First, the abolition of slavery. The first organized movements to abolish slavery took shape in Britain, inspired by religious and Enlightenment ideas. The British took the lead in encouraging all nations to end the slave trade and slavery within their own countries, though it took until 1888 for the last country to do so. This map shows the year during which slavery was abolished, and the colors essentially represent places where slavery was abolished. And so you can see throughout the Americas, slavery was in fact abolished, but as you can see in the key over here, it took about 100 years for that to happen. Contrary to expectations, ending slavery generally did not improve the social, political, or economic status of former slaves, and these pressures continued into the 20th century. There are a couple of events mentioned in this heading you should be sure to focus on. The first is the Russian Tsar's decision to free the serfs in 1861, and the second is the large wave of migration that occurred after slavery was abolished, with workers from India and China moving around the world to fill the labor void created by the end of slavery. Those are a couple of things that are just mentioned in the book, but are relatively important. You should make sure you get them down. The next echo is nations and nationalism. This was a new concept that had a massive impact on world events in the 19th and 20th centuries. Revolutions, Napoleon's conquest, the scientific revolution, migration, and linguistic assimilation all helped to create communities in which people identified themselves primarily as members of a nation. This process began in Europe and spread around the globe, ultimately leading to the fall of empires that ruled over culturally diverse groups. This new identity and focus on the nation changed the way governments associated with citizens and with each other, as you will see in future chapters. We'll keep returning to the theme of nationalism in this unit and also in the next one. And then we have feminism. Many activists who called for equal rights based on race and ethnicity called for gender equality as well. Political revolutions and the abolitionist movement helped speed this process along, as did the industrialization of European societies, which you will read about in the next chapter. As the feminist movement developed, it emphasized the right to vote for women. This picture here shows a march in support of women's suffrage, or women being given the right to vote, and was directed by leaders in Britain and America, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton. While feminism did not have immediate success in the 19th century, by the 20th century, gender equality was an increasingly common expectation, along with political and racial equality. In this way, Enlightenment philosophy profoundly transformed human communities, especially in Europe and the Americas. Now for the 10-second spice review. Enlightenment ideas inspired sweeping changes in the Atlantic world. Socially, the feminist movement arose, while political revolutions swept through the region. The climate of sugar-producing lands continued to demand labor-intensive organization. Despite this trend, Christian and Quaker movements called for the end of slavery as an economic system. And finally, the visual summary. As you've noticed, the Enlightenment has really been the centerpiece of the inspiration of the events described in this chapter. And so first we have the Enlightenment inspiring political revolutions in North America, in France, in Haiti, and in Spanish America. And the political changes in those four places inspired these movements: the movement to abolish slavery, nationalism, and feminism. That's your Chapter 17 overview. Happy reading!